Hey, I'm Decathlon Gamer, and welcome to a Pro Cycling Manager 2023 tutorial. This one is on how to get +5 race day condition in your game, and specifically for key objectives. Let's start with the easy one, how to even possibly have a +5 race day condition. Since PCM23, there is now an option in settings that you must alter. The default is a range of +3 to -3 for race day condition. You manually have to go in and change it to a potential of 5. But that does mean that comes at both ends. You have the potential for +5s, but you also have the potential for -5s. You'll have to manage your teams well to ensure that you don't see the big negatives as well as the great positives that you can get from that. You may ask the question, what actually goes into race day condition to make up that +5 or that +2 or that negative race day condition? Well, this is what breaks it down, and you do get this info before every single race. If you go into your briefing tab and then hover over race day condition, or even over fitness peak for that matter, you could tell on when and how you're going to hit fitness peaks. That's another topic we don't really need to break into because now all of it is done so automatically over selecting those objectives appropriately. But here is what goes into it. So motivation, being average here for this particular rider, motivation is tied directly to morale. Now, if you come into a key race or if you are in a surprise lead position, there are boosts, there are bonuses, but also just poor morale or really good morale will impact their motivation for a particular race. The weather does have a daily impact on what's going to happen regarding race day condition, though it will often lead to less than a point of impact on what the outcome of the race day condition is. But if combined with other factors, it will then add up to equal usually a negative and not necessarily a positive. Your recovery attribute will also impact your race day condition. However, this is meant for the longer stage races. If you have a 5-day or less stage race, your recovery will not impact it at all. But the longer a race goes on and the weaker your recovery attribute, the more it will impact, meaning you'll more and more as the race goes on show signs of fatigue, meaning less positive race day condition. Fatigue, general fatigue, tiredness. This one can have a huge detriment. It is the one that will cause -5s more often than not, and that is that fatigue factor. Training camps are a thing and can provide bonuses, but the only recon training camps that exist out there are for the Grand Tours and not for any other races on the calendar, but they will provide a bonus on specific stages depending on which one you go on the reconnoitering training camps. And finally, preparation. That is the objective and or fitness peak element, and that is the one that is going to be the key to getting those +5s. Here for this particular race, this rider has an expected race day condition bonus of +2. His preparation bonus, he's on the fitness peak, but it's not an objective, equals +3. But because of the weather and a little bit minor fatigue for him, that combination of those two is a -1, so that's why he has a net expected of a +2 entering the race. Depending on the team that you manage and its quality, the needs of what you do when it comes to selecting your key objectives can vary wildly. A weaker team is going to need to focus primarily on sponsor objectives in order to increase funding. A strong team that already has good funding can focus on the races that they want to succeed at. A team in between might get to do a little bit of each. They're going to have to focus on key objectives, but then also spread that out a little bit, at least for a handful of key races for the year, possibly the bigger ones, maybe a World Tour race you get an invite to if you're a Continental Pro team, for example. For the tutorial, I've picked Caja Rural It's a Continental Pro team. It's a well-established Continental Pro team based in Spain, so they often get invites to the Vuelta a España and other major races in the World Tour, at least a decent amount of them across the course of a season. As a result, they have a pretty decent budget, and they are comfortably in place in Continental Pro, which means this would be a team on paper that I could focus primarily on a few key objectives and then whatever our big races are that we are in for World Tour for the coming season. To regularly get +5 race day condition, 95% of the work is going to go into objectives planning. Get the objectives right, and you will see the most +5s across the season at the key moments that you need them to be there. First thing that I do is I wipe out the existing objectives. Select all and trash can to delete, and we are going to start from scratch on this process. While there is a useful tool on that objective screen, and it very much does come in handy, just added this year for PCM23, I still prefer to start my process over here on the sponsor screen though. I need to know what the key objectives are, and almost more importantly, what the profile of those races will be. From the objective screen, I get the key information that I need going forward in all but one sense, and I can still get the other piece of information from this screen as well. Though importance is the key to getting a high race day condition and knowing which races you need to set as objectives, the calendar and the date is still how I sort, because all of it is laid out in that fashion. Because if you have too many objectives, or they are too close together, or if the timing's not done correctly, it will lead to riders that are overly fatigued or do not reach fitness peaks in time, or is just inefficient on how, when, where you can be using the objectives to help you get to a +5 race day condition. One great example of being efficient is taking a look at these first 5 objectives that are here. Now, 2 of them are on the more major side of what is out there at 2.5 stars, enough to draw some attention. Not serious attention, but a fair bit of attention when you're doing your planning at the start of the season. But the key about these 5 objectives is that all 5 of these races take place back to back to back over a stretch of 5 days. When you add those stars together, that becomes a pretty important 5-day stretch. One thing that you can do with your riders when you have back-to-backs, races within about 1 week of each other, 2 weeks is really starting to push it, but I'll go that distance every once in a while, and I've been known to stretch to 3 weeks when I really need to. Not a fan of doing it. That does lead to too much fatigue. But when you sandwich a group of dates together as an objective and take the same key riders to those races, you can repeatedly, for race after race, have a very high race day condition, +3s, 4s, 5s across the board for your team. But other than knowing that they are important and knowing that these races take place over 5 days, that doesn't mean you want to take the same riders for each. You need to know 2 key things about it before you decide who is going to be racing for you on those days. First thing is you need to know what the objective is. These are all classics, and they are all top 5 or top 10 objectives. Meaning you just need to get in there. You need to get in the mix. You need to place well. But the second key thing, and this one's really important, is you need to know the profile. If you don't have the profile sorted out, well, then you're stabbing in the dark. You're taking a random team. If you take your best 7 riders to each and every race, those best 7 riders may not complement each other very well, and you may not find a whole lot of success. But if you take your 7 best climbers to a mountain stage, and you take your total sprint team, those 4 riders or so, your your sprinter, your couple lead out riders, somebody with a really good flat rating to lead the train and pull it forward, and then maybe a few random climbers that can support and help them get over some undulating periods. You have a sprint team, you have a punchy team, you have a classics team, you have a full mountain team, you have a medium mountain team. There's so many different options. You have your time trialists. Because of specialties, you've got to know what you're dealing with. And from this screen, you can see right here, just hovering over info, I get a picture of the stage, at least with a classic. With stage races, you're going to have to click on it to go in further to break it down stage by stage to know that one. But here, a punchy team is good. But when you really look at the profile, it finishes on a sprint. So while a puncher will assure you get a top 10, if you bring a couple sprinters along with you and keep them protected and then keep your best puncher protected as you're going through, you may have a chance to place quite high. You could probably easily get a podium if you keep your sprinter fresh throughout the course of that race. Here is an actual sprint race, but it does have that undulation. This one definitely has a punchy finish. It's classified mountain. On paper, if you brought just your climbers, you might not get the result you need because that's a pretty short finish. Medium mountain, maybe even somebody who's a little bit mixed of they have that climbing ability but have that hills rating can be really effective for a race such as this. So looking at these 5 races, you can see that there's variation. This is another punchy one that if you can keep your sprinters over the top of that last climb, you could finish this with a sprinter or that puncher, or if it's really hard, it's going to come down to a climber. So you really want to mix for that race. This one is a pure sprint with very little undulation. From this, I would think that there's 2 suitable teams that you would need to get to these races. One with the punchers / sprinter, couple just for the pure sprinters. But with that, there's a lot of overlap in there. And you can, over that 5-day stretch, more or less have the same team, bar, 1 or 2 guys. But a key thing to note is that a larger race, higher category than any of those 5, handful of days, but just after that 5-day stretch, is the biggest objective of the entire year. And that's a must hit. If you don't hit that one, you negate pretty much everything you did well over that 5-day stretch. So that 4-star objective is quite important. Because it is so close, because it's less than, it's just a couple of days later, this is the kind where I would not mind overlapping at all this objective with the previous objectives, as it's close enough together. On paper, it looks like it is punchy, but this is where I would want to go in and know the actual profile. And by clicking on the name, we can sort out stage by stage what we have with this race. And you can see this is similar in that profile to what we had in some others. If you can protect with climbers, you could get your sprinter to the end on this one most likely and have them compete. Have your puncher as a backup. It does look quite possible to succeed, where here this is definitely down to the puncher. Here's another opportunity for a combo. If you can get them over the climbs, your sprinters could come down and get that win you need. This one definitely medium mountain kind of range with a decent climb at the end and a pure sprint in the final one. This is a sequence of a couple of weeks where I think the strongest thing that I would do, depending on my team profile, and I really haven't looked at the riders that are here, but if I have a quality sprinter, I'm going to surround them with my sprint team and then some really good climbers to keep them protected. Because over the course of those 5 races plus these 5 stages, over those 10 days of racing, I think there's a good, 7 opportunities, 8 opportunities that could come down to a sprinter if you handle it right. That would be the team that I would focus on. What you need for this race is a stage win. You don't have to succeed daily. You have to succeed once. And if you have 3 opportunities to do that out of 5 stages that are there by bringing that strong team, That's not to say that you're not going to go do something well on the day that's a climb, because you did bring some climbers and maybe they'll succeed and do well on the GC. But to get that stage win that's necessary, to get those top fives that are necessary on those previous days, that would be the kind of team that I would bring. So knowing the profile is as important as anything else in this process. And what I end up doing when I'm on this screen, besides going race by race and knowing what that profile is and what the objective is I am taking notes. I'm taking notes of the key objectives of the year. I'm writing down first what the objective is, top 5, so a T5, T10, SW for a stage win, a brief description, Calvia, Andalusia, what the category of the race is, because when you get into the objectives, you're going to have to go through category by category to find them, otherwise it takes forever. So knowing which category it's in will save you a lot of time on the objective screen. I do write down the date, however, I usually ignore the range. I just write down the date it starts. It really doesn't matter so much what the range is, you just need to know when these align, because knowing that these are all back to back to back means I can sandwich those together. The importance, of course, is one of those chief things. We've got to put more emphasis on a 4-star objective than we do on a 1 or 2-star objective, or for that matter, anything in that mid-range either. And then finally, I write down the profile. That profile determines which riders are going to be assigned to that objective. These being sandwiched means it's possible to bring the same riders, but this stretch here, even though they are back to back, are ones that you could probably largely ignore, except for here we go again with another major objective, actually a couple of them, back to back in February. I would end up ignoring these 3, and I would probably sandwich these 2 together, seeing what you can bring. You need a stage win for these. There's a punchy one there, there's punchy there, there's 4 punchy stages available in those 2 races. If you have a good punchy team, that seems like a very logical choice. And of course, again, if you break down profile, if they have those sprint finishes, you could be looking at the same circumstances, except that this would be too close together. I would not want to bring the same team that I've brought to these 6 races. I wouldn't want to bring that same team for these races. Back to back like that will lead to way too much exhaustion, and you will not see those +5s for multiple reasons. They'll be too tired. They won't be hitting their fitness peak at the right time at all, which, by the way, nobody hits a fitness peak in January. It starts a little bit late. So what I would probably do is assign these as the objectives, because you're hitting more needs. If it turns out you need the same riders, assign them to that race, but don't make it an objective. They are probably going to be on their fitness peak by early mid-February. They're going to miss the fitness peak here, so they'll get +2s, +3s on the first handful of races, because it's too early in the calendar. That January 1st start of training thing, it doesn't take over in time. So the first one almost always ends up coming a little bit late, but those +2s and +3s usually are enough, because no one in the field has hit a fitness peak by the end of January. But by mid-March, they'll be on that fitness peak late. So without the objective, okay, they don't have 1 bonus point there, but now you're looking at +3s and 4s to those races anyway. However, be careful, because that's a lot of racing pretty early in the season. You're going to want to give them a pretty healthy break after that, which is good, because the next objective is not until April. That is a standalone objective, April 1st. I would not want to mix those racers with another objective that soon for a single race that you need a top 10 in. This is one that I would bring my best B team to, guys that didn't compete in that previous race, and give them that objective as a standalone, and that'll give you every opportunity you need. If you can get those +5s, especially if that's the first objective of the year for that B team, they'll hit that fitness peak at the right time. They'll be set when they get there, and you'll have a group of your B team, mostly all on +5s, 3s, 4s, and 5s for that race. You're going to have a great opportunity to get a top 10 and complete that objective and be resting your main guys and not have an overload of objectives. Now, on this calendar, funny as it is, that's already almost it. There is 2 1-star or less objectives later on that are very unimportant to you, and then 1 major objective later. However, important to note that the signing period for sponsors is the final day of July. So from August on, you have already signed your contract for the next year. It's already locked in. You can fail every objective the rest of the way and see your sponsor confidence plummet. It will make no difference because you already signed on the line. You could be just shy of super success and then succeed at Burgos and not see a change in your sponsorship money because it's already complete. However, I would still probably throw in and get that one signed. But if we're going to La Vuelta, that's a good one to add in. It's not about that sponsor. It's about what you can do for your team and how you can succeed. So it's very clear that for this team, the important period that you're dealing with is late January to late February. And that's almost all your sponsor confidence taken care of in one stretch. And ultimately, you could probably take the same 7 riders, assign that first one, and overlap that into the second. But don't assign that second one, as that's going to create some major headaches for you later on. Now on to the objectives page, because this is where things are easily set for you to plan this out and do this appropriately. The biggest thing is to make sure that these objectives, if you're sandwiching them, they need to be close together on the calendar. Don't overload it. Don't go crazy with it, and make sure you're not stretching beyond a couple weeks. But after that, they need a healthy break. You need to wait a couple of months before you kick off the next objective. But so much of it really depends on that calendar. But if you're pushing like 6 weeks or less in between objectives, you're going to have fatigue problems. You're not going to have their fitness peak triggering at the right time. So you're really playing with fire. It's a risky move. But if you have at least 8 weeks in between, preferably as much as 12 weeks in between objectives, then you will easily see them hit the objective at the right time. So you'll have the bonus for A, having the objective, you'll have the bonus for B, being on a fitness peak, and C, having their fitness level in the high 90s. That combination will lead to a lot of +5s. So here on the objectives screen, what I'm going to do first is I need to pick out that team. Who are those 7 riders that I'm going to want for that first sequence of a couple of weeks? Now, as already noted, I want a sprinter and I want a lead-out rider. Sprint-wise, yeah, it's not looking great. Aular, 73-74 for the sprint, can climb to an extent, and that's going to be really handy for the profile that we're going for. So that's definitely the first guy that you're going to want to bring. The lead-out guy, not much of a climber. Is there much of a drop-off here? Is he better as a climber? A little bit better. There's probably a better combination. Good acceleration, decent enough sprint, and can climb. So Barcelo's going to be coming in as that lead-out guy. Paredes is a decent enough climber and the next highest flat rated rider. So there's your sprint team selected. From here, we now need 4 guys that can climb, and at least one of those to be decently punchy. Turns out that those 3 are actually the best punchers on the team and therefore kind of become that focal point anyway. And they're actually among the best climbers that the team has. Cepeda, as the best climber, becomes an easy 4th choice. For me doing this, seeing the rest of what we have breakdown-wise and how similar so many of the riders are, I would probably split the period now into different teams. I would keep these 4 primary guys for that double sequence. Give them that first objective, have them race in both races, I would rotate the other 3. That first 5 days plus that stage race after that 6th race, I'd have one team of 3 support climbers for that one, and then I would take the next 3 best or balance 3 more, ultimately taking the 6 best climbers and put 3 and 3 into the 2 different race sequences. That way you can get that better potential of getting a +5 for each of those sets. Now, of course, already noted, right, that January 1, nobody's going to hit that fitness peak yet. Now, the convenient thing here is I wrote down that 1.1, and those 5 races back to back to back are all 1.1 races. So they fall into that Classics 0.1, and here's that convenient part where it is starred. It does tell us what the objective is. That is a wonderful addition here, but we can assign all 5 of those races at once just by clicking this button. They've all picked that up. Now, that seems like a lot, but because they are all literally a 5-day stretch, it's not going to be an issue. Don't forget to add in the other one, Andalusia, or Valenciana, that is. And there is that set. Now, I could keep those same 3, or same 4, unselect these 3, select the 3 more, and for them, go get the other race. However, remember, we wanted to keep those 4 part of it, but not assign it. So we would assign these 3 that other set of objectives. Again, we have that standalone for a B team at some point later on. So that B team, would be those like next 3, or maybe you take the risk, right? You want that standalone to be clear, then don't assign these 3. Take the same 7. Take these 3, save them for that race, plus a few more, and that's a decision up to the team manager. But that is how you're going to break down that calendar. So again, this is busy. It looks so busy, but really it's only 2 weeks. It's only 2 weeks worth of objectives. So they're going to go in, they're going to have those objective bonuses, they're going to have a high fitness level. The fitness peak may trigger towards the tail end of it, but it'll at least be available for that race follows it a week and a half later. They'll definitely have it for that, but make sure they get a break. Make sure you don't overwork them. Get them back fresh before you put in that next objective. And as this is a mid-February, I would wait a good 2.5 months just because of how busy that is. So I would wait until beginning of May before I would think about signing another objective to any of those riders. Let's say you get an invite to the Tour de France, and those are your key guys that you want to bring, and that's your greatest strength as a team. Well then, yeah, keep the calendar clear until then. You have your beginning of season objective, big focus. They go out, they're gaining all that sponsor confidence for you. Their next objective is not until July, and that's okay. That's okay, because if you go May and then turn around and have another one in July, it's too close together. So it's okay to have it spread out a bit further at a big focal point. But that's why you have your B team for April. That's why you have your C team for May, June. If the squad's large enough, you could spread out some objectives with some different riders. Also, really not a bad idea when you have a little 1-star objective somewhere and you've got some young rider that you want to develop that has high potential. It's a 1-star objective. They are perfect to start filling in those little areas. You get them a +5 for that one, and all of a sudden they get to be a leader for a day. Or they're still the domestique, but man, oh man, they put in a big turn for your team that made a big difference. And that rider was so weak because their ability isn't there yet. They're in their first year of their contract, and they're high potential but low current. Great opportunity for them to contribute something to the team and get you a chance, especially if you're like me and you quick sim a lot of the races that you don't focus on. You don't go out and race every single time. It's a great opportunity to see that young rider and see how they're developing at that point. One thing to keep in mind, I will often go through and do my entire calendar at the beginning of the year, but 2 notes regarding that. There are changes that do occur over a season. Notably, riders develop. So a rider who wasn't very good now will suddenly be one of your better riders later on. It's usually not that drastic, but those changes do happen over the course of a season. Also, 2, and this is the important one, is that riders will get injured, which means things change. It is okay if you know in advance, a few weeks away, you have a rider that has gone down injured, they have an objective that's coming up. It is okay to go in and find somebody else on the team as a replacement. Now, if it's close, if it's a couple days away or a few weeks away, there's no way they're going to hit their fitness peak, but at least they're going to get their objective bonus. Or if they're just hovering in the 80s fitness wise, you throw that objective in a week or two in advance, and they'll train a little bit harder during that stretch, and it'll get them up into that 90s at least, so they have good fitness and they'll have the objective bonus. It's better than nothing. But use that sparingly. Definitely use that on somebody who has a big empty slot where they don't have another objective coming up somewhere around that. Otherwise, you're going to overload them. What I have a tendency to do is those with that early objective, I'll set to high. Those that are my mid-tier competitive riders, I'll set to normal so that I have them available for some early races. Anybody else on the team, I'll actually set all the way to low, because by the time they build their fitness up and by the time they start racing, they're going to have no fatigue from the early portion of the season. And so it's going to prolong their fatigue kicking in later on in the year. It's really handy when you start getting late in the season and you are experiencing some fatigue, to have some of those reserves on your team come in and be fresh and have good race day conditions, and them experiencing those +4s, +5s, supporting the team leaders that at this point are struggling to get 0s and 1s and have decent race day condition, because they've just done too much at that point in the year and they're a bit tired and fading. So at least having some support is really helpful in those late stage races. Most of those aren't important really for me. There's only a couple. There's one monument right at the end of the season, of course, the Vuelta a España. Outside of that, there's only a handful of races that I usually bother with at the tail end of the season. The last step, and this after going through and properly setting up all of your objectives beforehand, becomes the easiest step. I do use the auto planning assistant. It is very effective if you have first taken care of this element. If you have your objectives set, you know which riders you're wanting to bring to races, this becomes so easy, because once you set those objectives, you're going to get this green line. And if you've jotted down what the races are, you know what races it's for. We have the Valenciana, and you just click and drag and bring it down and then fill it out for each of those 7 riders. So I will manually fill in the key races, manually fill in the ones where those objectives are set, and then make sure, again, remember we wanted to get each of these. And if you remember, there was at least the 4 key riders, but in this case we're opting to keep the same 7 to set up a B team for that April objective. Means that our other race that comes up, they don't get the objective for it, but they're going to get the benefit of the fitness peak by this point. And so don't forget to add in the Andalusia. But you fill those out and you go through. I go through the entire calendar at the beginning of the year with this one and do that and take care of it and knock it out right away, right off the bat. And then the rest of the calendar ends up filling itself out. So you hit those fitness peaks when you need, you're at the right races with the right setup, and everything works out most of the time. You'll find, though, once you start pushing for those +5s, that you're never going to quite get the expected race day condition. If every single member of your team is expected to have a +5 that day, that adds up to a net +35 expected for 7 riders. You're not going to get a +35. You're not going to get 7 riders with a +5, because the way the random draw works, it's going to go above or below that line. And if 3 riders go above a +5, they're still only going to receive a +5. So the +1 and the +2 and the +3 that those 3 riders had, that +6, well, it's going to end up offsetting with those 3 riders that had a -1 and a -2 and a -3. And so you're going to end up 6 points below. But that's a net +29 for your 7 riders. And that is going to be a phenomenal rating. That's going to be roughly a +4 across the board for your team. And they're going to be looking really good for that race, for that day. That's going to do it for this tutorial. I'm Decathlon Gamer. Hopefully this will help you get some +5s along the way. Don't forget to go in those settings and enable it. Otherwise, you're going to be limited to a +3, -3. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one. Be safe out there, and bye for now.